I was definitely at the point where I was ready to try steroids. Like if the Megaspore hadn't really worked for me, I was at the point where, I couldn't sleep and my sheets were sticking to my hands whenever I did sleep. And so, that's a really kind of very awful place to be.
Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to episode number 39 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's show, I'm going to be talking to a fan of the Healthy Skin Show who watched the Eczema and Psoriasis Awareness Week and took some of the principles that she learned and had a huge improvement in her skin. And we'll hear all about how she made that happen. One of my missions with the Healthy Skin Show was to include the whole community as part of the show. It's why, for example, I answer listener questions. And when someone has a really amazing story to tell, or even just some advice based on where they are, and, not everybody has healed their skin rashes. Not everybody's gotten to the end point, and that's okay. The whole idea is that you guys feel heard, that you know that this show isn't about me, that ultimately it's about all of us together, that we can share our collective knowledge and the things that have worked, maybe the things that haven't worked, our frustrations, as well as what it's like to live with chronic skin rashes, because I lived with them for a number of years. And I have to tell you, the way that my life was then is not the way that it is now. And there's a lot that can really harm your sense of self-worth as well as your self-confidence. And the fact that we can share all of that together, as well as lift each other up in those moments where we do finally triumph, I think that is truly amazing. And I love that we have this community that is growing together to change the way that we approach chronic skin rash conditions so that maybe at the end of the day, we don't feel like our only choice is to suffer for the rest of our lives or take medication that you might not be comfortable with. I love the fact that you are finding other options, and that is why I do this. That said, I just want to say thank you so much to Bogart Cooper. They've left a really great review over on iTunes, which you guys know I really deeply appreciate your reviews on any platform where you listen to this podcast. So Bogart shared that the title of this is Serendipity. And they say, I'm so glad I stumbled upon this podcast series. Wonderfully done and amazing information that's incredibly empowering to people with chronic skin concerns. I can't wait to share. And that's one of the biggest pieces that I love is that everyone who's listening, including you, there is this desire and willingness to share, right? I always say sharing is caring. I'm doing this because I want to share with you everything that I learn, all of the information that I come across, all of the relationships that I spend so much time building and cultivating to get these minds here to share with you. And I love the fact that all of us are willing to share our journeys and experiences together. And that is an amazing thing. So remember, if you have tuned into this podcast and you really haven't shared before, but you're in, say, a Facebook group where they talk a lot about chronic skin rashes, share a link to one of your favorite podcasts or share a link to the show itself and encourage people to start opening their minds up to the possibility that there could be other things that could change the course of their entire experience and healing journey. And oftentimes, when people feel really stuck, and I remember feeling this way, which I'm so glad that my husband helped break me free from that. But when you feel really stuck, it's hard to ask the right questions because you don't even think that there is anything else out there for you to do. So by simply sharing these episodes and the show with other people who could really use a lifeline, so to speak, to other options, it can really change somebody else's experience. And that's why I invited Nora on the show today. She was really surprised when she wrote me to share her story back in January. She had watched the Eczema and Psoriasis Awareness Week 2018, and had taken a bunch of the advice that was given by the different experts whom I interviewed. And there was one particular piece of advice that really changed everything for her. So again, this is why I'm like, you got to share this, because you never know what one little piece of information could do for somebody else out there whose life is just in shambles because they're so uncomfortable. What I want to tell you about this particular episode before we dive into it is that I am not in any way, shape, or form, nor is Nora, you guys, about what she did and that it will work for you. The whole point here is that this was a missing piece for Nora. And I can tell you this from clinical experience that it has been a very helpful piece for a number of my other clients. This conversation has to do with applying probiotics topically and the use of probiotics, even in a combination of taking them in orally and then applying them topically, and how that could possibly help you. But it is something you've got to be consistent about. And I want you to listen to all of the things that Nora is doing to really help her skin. And here's the other piece to this. If you want to give the particular product a try, it's called Probiotic. Some of you may have heard about it or you've already been using it. There will be a link in the show notes to the dispensary where you can purchase it. You cannot just go to the grocery store or a pharmacy and buy it. You have to be an approved practitioner, which I am. So you can go through that link, set up an account, and then take a look at the product and see if it's a good fit for you. That said, I will tell you this, a couple of really nice things about it. It is a non-refrigerated probiotic. It's actually spore-based. And as a result, it can make it through the stomach acid without the capsule. So if you can't swallow pills, it can be a great option. If you've got kids or even pets, although I don't think they promote it for that, but I do know a bunch of people that have used it on their pets, as have I with my cats. You can open up the capsule and it can just be consumed with food. If you do decide that you are going to test this out on your skin, the great thing, because it's not refrigerated, you can open the capsule, sprinkle it on the skin, and then reclose the capsule up and put it aside and continue to use that capsule instead of feeling like you have to waste all of what's left in the capsule. So it's really easy to apply. I'll actually link to the episode where Karan Krishnan talks about applying probiotics topically. It was a previous episode. I'll put that in the show notes. And he discussed it on the Eczema and Psoriasis Awareness Week 2018. So that was where a lot of people had heard about it and started to test this out and found a lot of positive results. That said, do not apply this with coconut oil. You guys should know this by now. I've talked a lot about why coconut oil is not the best choice. If you're going to use some sort of oil to help maintain that barrier and then to apply the probiotics topically, you could try olive oil, jojoba, sesame seed, avocado oil, just not coconut oil, okay? You don't want to kill all of the bacteria. That's what we're trying to get away from. And if you're wondering what's the exact way I do this, basically apply your oil of choice, sprinkle over a light sprinkling of the probiotic and allow it to sit for your choice of time. And you could then wipe it off. You could certainly try applying it once or twice a day. I would say before you start doing this, take a picture of the rash. That way, after a week or two of application, not just might you experience a significant difference in your symptoms, but then you can compare images before and after and see if you notice any change in the redness or the size of the rash or anything like that. So it's a nice, easy trick to see if application of topical probiotics may be of benefit. All right, with that said, let's dive into the conversation with Nora.
Hi, everyone. Today I have a very special guest with me, someone who has been on my newsletter list for a while, and she shared with me this story that was super inspirational. And so I invited her to come and share her story about having the same exact skin condition that I had called Dyshidrotic Eczema. So it's eczema that happens to affect your hands. And it can be very, very debilitating. And so I was really appreciative that not only was she willing to come and share her story about the trials that she had gone through and trying to figure it out for herself, but also what has worked for her. And so we're not saying that whatever is shared today is going to work for you, because everybody's journey is a little bit different. However, I would love for you to pull from this inspiration and hope, and maybe some ideas of keeping an open mind and saying, oh, wow, look, this is what worked for her. Maybe I should give this a try, or would this be right for me to try? And asking those questions. So my guest today is Nora Ureste, and she is from Austin, Texas. She lives there with her husband and her 2 girls. And she and I, it's interesting, we both share a passion for learning everything that we can. And she specifically loves to learn about indoor environment and is studying right now on the principles of building biology and working toward becoming a certified building biology consultant. She has a wide array of passions, and even including having been an Airbnb host. So you never know, you may have rented from her at one point. But Nora, thank you so much for joining us. It's much appreciated that you're here.
Sure, my pleasure.
So why don't we start off by sharing a little bit about how did your eczema start? Like, how long ago was that, and what were the symptoms that you experienced?
So I've had hand eczema on and off since probably my early 30s, but in very small patches for the most part, and they would last for maybe a month, and then they would go away. They would, flake and just kind of go away. I attributed it to seasonal allergies because I live in Austin, and there are so many allergens in the air, like 365 days of the year. They started to get more kind of intense back, I would say, in January of 2018, where they didn't heal. And I was getting patches around my kind of around my palm and up into my fingers, into the folds of my fingers. And so they just kept getting, I guess, worse. They wouldn't go away. And no matter how much I moisturized or kind of did, just other things to kind of help with like diet and things like that, it just didn't really seem to help. It just seemed to spread and get worse. And so I mostly ignored it. By the summer, it got really bad. We went traveling for the summer last year. And then by the time I got back, my entire hands had, on my left hand, had basically gotten inflamed with eczema. And they were weepy and flaking and bleeding and cracking. And so that's kind of, where I kind of freaked out.
I can understand too, because we were sharing before we started recording this, just like how much having eczema on your hands, directly on the palms of your hands, really impacts your life. Yes. And, for me, I was saying I used to teach cooking classes. And so number one, I always had to wear gloves, some sort of vinyl glove touching any food. But then it came to the point where I was like, standing in front of a class of 30 some people with either gloves on my hand or really messed up hands. And the first thought is, A, why are you wearing those gloves? And B, did you touch that food with those hands? And cringing, aside from not being able to shower, not being able to wash my hands, not being able to like pick things up or touch things, not being able to exercise. Was there anything that you were kind of impaired from doing as a result?
Yes, all of those. So much like you, I couldn't, at that point, around August, September-ish, I really couldn't close my hands without them cracking and bleeding and weeping. They were extremely itchy. So even though they were weeping and I knew I shouldn't, aggravate the skin further, I couldn't help myself from the itching because there was flaking. And so, I couldn't turn a doorknob. I couldn't pick up laundry. I couldn't, all the things you just do at home for yourself and for your family was really hard for me to do. And yeah, just like putting soap on it, really burned. So I couldn't use any soap. And so at this point, I decided to go to a dermatologist. And they did, I knew, like we were talking before, my daughter has eczema, so I knew they would, mostly recommend a steroid. But what they also recommended was that I keep my hands moisturized, like heavily moisturized. They're like, just moisturize like as much as you can. And so I took heart to that. And I did. I moisturized as much as I could. And then they recommended that I wear gloves anytime I touched anything, like, when I was cooking or when I was, washing dishes or anything like that, to wear gloves. So I did that. I didn't do any of the antibiotics or anything, but what I did have them do is do some tests. So I did a fungal test and bacterial test, and they said I was clear. I didn't have any of that. So hopefully that was not contributing to any of the eczema. But then from there, I believe in October is when I started using the Megaspore Biotic, because I was always on some kind of probiotic. Your doctor recommends, go ahead and diversify your gut and whatnot. And so I used, I had just finished some bottle, I don't remember which one it was, and I had the Megaspore Biotic. And within 2 or 3 weeks, the itching really subsided, which was good because you're not damaging, you're not wanting to scratch and damage your hands. And then, within another month, my hands actually stopped getting blisters and they stopped weeping. And I had the eczema also all over the tips of my fingers. And so the inflammation there actually stopped around my fingers and in between my fingers. Also, it kind of had spread just kind of in between my fingers and almost kind of coming over to the top part of my hand also. But that stopped. And so, I think around December, I would say mid-December, I was kind of felt like almost back to normal. My hands are soft now and not cracked and flaky, and I can do everything. I'm still really cautious in that I put gloves on all the time and I try to moisturize as much as possible just to be cautious. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of my story.
It's really cool too, because so for everybody listening, the way that this happened was that many months ago I had shared an email about someone else in the community who had gotten really good results adding Megaspore into their diet. And I believe that's the email you had read, right? That gave you that idea.
I think so, yeah.
And so then Nora had emailed me, and I definitely have photos too, which we'll show of her hands before and after in the show notes. That way you can take a look at them for yourself, because it was pretty astonishing that, you were able to get that cleared up. Now, that may not work. I want to be very clear. That may not work for everybody. It may be a piece of the puzzle for you. But Nora, you were also doing other things too. You were on a paleo diet, correct?
Right. For the most part, our family has been paleo for a long time, 10 years. So, and I am kind of a relaxed paleo. So usually, during the week, I do my best to not eat dairy, and, we do no gluten. And, but come the weekend, I would usually have a little bit of cheese or might have a little piece of bread or something like that. And so when my eczema got really out of control, I thought, I know all these things can inflame the gut. So I really just want to cut all that stuff out. So I cut all of that out. I also cut out a few other things that we were eating repeatedly. We have a lot of coconut flour, so I took that out of my diet. And we also eat a lot of nuts. So I took, a lot of those nuts and seeds out of my diet. And then I also took chocolate out of my diet, because I heard you talk to Dr. Kara about a low nickel diet. So I thought maybe that was, so at the point right before I started taking Megaspore, I was trying all kinds of diet things, elimination things, trying to kind of figure out what might be setting this off, to where I'm, flaring up day after day with new blisters and a new, just cracking and not healing and things like that. So at the point that I was trying Megaspore Biotic, there was a lot of things out of my diet. I was mostly eating just vegetables and, just proteins. And that was pretty much it. Very restrictive. So I don't know if that helped with once I started taking the Megaspore, if that helped in any way, the combination of the two. But what I do know is that I have put some of those things back into my diet. I'm still paleo, but like I have done a little bit of cheese here and there on the occasional, whatever weekend. And I haven't really flared up like I have in a bad way. Sometimes there's a middle spot in the middle of my palm that still gets a little bit flared up, but nothing the way it had before.
I also want to specify too that, for many people who've listened to this podcast, they've probably heard me at this point talk a bunch of times about being careful and taking too much stuff out of your diet, because it's really easy, right? It's the first thing you can control. You're like, well, I'm going to take this out and this out and this out. And oftentimes we have this, I consider them buckets. So people may have like 3 to 5 different buckets where change needs to happen or support needs to happen. So maybe some dietary changes are helpful, but you can't just typically stop there. You probably are going to have to say, okay, what can I do to support my gut, right? So in this particular case, this probiotic really worked for you. And then also taking that extra step and making sure that you're keeping the skin moisturized. The moisture barrier, which Dr. Peter Leo talked about in the first episode of this podcast, of keeping that barrier moisturized is so important. And we can definitely link to that in the show notes for anybody who might have skipped over it, because I think that you got to look at this from as many different perspectives as possible. Don't just stop at the food piece and think, I'm going to keep pulling this out and this out and this out and this out until you're finally on this little iceberg that is shrinking quickly underneath you. You want to broaden that perspective. And I love that you were open, Nora, to this idea of saying, okay, well, what else could be causing this issue? And one really nice thing about Megaspore, which is why I use it in my practice, and for those of you listening, this is not an ad. It's just like, was Nora's journey. This is just what happened. But one of the reasons I like using it is they have a lot of great research about the way that it can help support repatterning, essentially, the microbiome in the gut, and the interesting connection between how the gut microbiome communicates with the skin microbiome. And because I know too that some of you may be really interested in that, I also will link in our show notes to Karan's double episode, because he's going to talk extensively about how that happens. And so that can help you guys who aren't really too familiar with the gut-skin connection to understand it a little more clearly. But Nora, just as to kind of like top things off, I mean, obviously you tried a bunch of things, some things worked, some things didn't. But now being on the other side of that, what have been like 2 or 3 bright points or highlights to the fact that you have that in your rearview mirror now? I mean, I recognize you're doing all this stuff, and I do the same. I still wear gloves. I still moisturize my hands. I still have some maintenance things that I do, and I'm willing to do them because I don't want to go back, and it's not out of fear. It's more out of self-care and self-love. But just for people who are still struggling with this, what are some things that you're able to do now that, really you couldn't do before?
There's a lot of things I could do now. I mean, definitely like just all the everyday stuff that you do, just the cooking and just your everyday like activities. But what I will say is I'm doing those things with kind of precautions, I guess, like I'm making sure that I don't, have soap all over my hands for 15 minutes. I'll make sure to wear gloves. But yeah, I think also too is just don't stop trying things. If you're suffering from eczema, it's just like, don't stop trying things, because like you said, everybody is different, and what may work for me may not work for everybody. So yeah, I guess I feel like, I stumbled upon this, in my research, and it took me a while to even try the Megaspore because I had been on other probiotics, and I thought, well, how is one different from another? And so, stumbling kind of on this and, taking the time to try it, I think and being open to new things is probably, I don't know, my biggest advice.
I appreciate you sharing that, your entire story. I know that for you, like, I asked you to be on a podcast, and you're like, wait, what? Wants me to be about this, but I'm love your story, and I love that you kept an open mind, and it can be really easy to lose hope through this whole process.
Yes.
I mean, I was on the verge of losing hope before I, like you said, keep an open mind. So before my mind got opened back up, I was at that point where I'm like, I am going to be doomed for the rest of my life like this.
Yeah. And I was definitely at the point where I was ready to try steroids. Like if the Megaspore hadn't really worked for me, I was at the point where, I couldn't sleep, and, my sheets were sticking to my hands whenever I did sleep. And so, I mean, that's a really kind of very awful place to be. And so, I was feeling like a bit hopeless. So I am glad that this worked for me and that I didn't have to, do steroids. But I mean, I would have if it hadn't have worked. If it had been just like any other probiotic that, didn't necessarily have any change, make any change with my eczema. So that's kind of at the point that I was at.
And that's a good point that you bring up too, is just that you've got to keep an open mind, but in the same respect, the one big piece to the Healthy Skin Show is that this is a place of non-judgment. So everybody's journey is your own. And, I used steroid creams. I had to. I was suffering so much, and the natural stuff, I'll put that in air quotes for everybody who's not watching the video. I mean, it took a while to work, and in the meantime, I needed to sleep. I needed to be able to function. I needed to be able to touch things. I needed to not have to be wearing gloves at business meetings and different things. It just was not. You can't walk your life like that. People ask questions, they stare, they don't want to shake your hand, they don't want to touch you.
I didn't want to shake other people's hands because my hands were weeping. I was like, I don't want to get, my fluids on you.
It goes both ways. And then you got to wash your hands because you don't know what they touched. I mean, it's just it's awful.
Yeah.
And so I just want to give everybody permission to know that, whatever your journey is your journey. And that's really important. And Nora, I just want to thank you so much for being brave enough to come on and share your journey. And I hope that you'll stay in touch with us and keep me posted on how things go so that
thank you.
You can be one of those. I really appreciate it because you're inspiring to myself and other people in this community who are looking for reasons to not give up hope. And to know that it is possible. I think a lot of people don't realize it is possible to get to the other side. They're stuck. They've been sick for so long, struggling with their skin, that they really think that all that is out there for them is just, how do I manage this for the rest of my life? And I want to utilize our community so that we can remind each other that it is possible to get to the other side, that you don't always just have to be fixated on the management of wrecked skin to some degree. So thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to share my story.
I hope that you found this conversation as enlightening and inspiring as I did. And one really cool tidbit that was not included in this conversation, because we recorded this beforehand, was that Nora and I actually got to meet in person in March. And I then got to see her hands in person. It was really interesting to look at her hands compared to those photos and the amount of progress that she's made. I hope that you'll give this a try. If you have any questions about Megaspore or applying probiotics topically, head on over to this episode's post and leave your questions in the comments section. If you want to see Nora's before and after photos, or you'd like to check more out about Megaspore, head on over to the post and all of the links and images are there. That way you can see if maybe it's a good fit for you to give a shot. As always, I really appreciate you showing up, tuning in, and sharing the episodes with people whom you know and love and totally appreciate this kind of information. Please subscribe to the podcast, and if you haven't done so, leave a review and rate the podcast. That way, the next person coming along, searching for a show, will see that this is of value. In the meantime, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode.